I'm Linda Abraham, president and founder of Accepted. I've been advising successful medical school applicants since 1994. In addition to my 26, almost 27 years as a med school admissions consultant, I'm the host of Admission Straight Talk. And in that capacity, I've interviewed med school professors, students, graduates, and about 25 current and former admissions directors at MD/DO, postbac, and PA programs, including those at Johns Hopkins, Washington University, the University of Washington in St. Louis, Yale, Duke, Baylor, Case Western, Hofstra, Loyola Stritch, SUNY Upstate, University of Connecticut, University of Vermont, Carle, Illinois, Kaiser, NYIT, Utah, School of Medicine, Texas A&M, and others. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to sharing my years of admissions consulting experience with you. Before we begin, I want to point out a few items that will help you maximize your time here and one that will help us improve these sessions. We're going to use the question window for your questions. That should be pretty obvious. We're going to ask that you use the chat window for your answers to my open-ended questions. If you've not yet downloaded your worksheet, again, I know I said this a second ago, but I'll say it again. Please take a second to do so and print it out. Again, Carly will post the link where you can get it from. It will help you get the most from today's presentation. When you leave, you're going to receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback. And the best item or announcement is the following: $75 off our rejection review if purchased by February 13th. That is, I think, Saturday. The coupon code is 2X Charms, second time's charm, and the URL is accepted.com/change-med-reject. Now, I always like to learn a little bit about my audience, and we have a poll where I can do so. How many times have you applied to medical school already? Okay. We have about 66% of you having voted. Question is, how many times have you applied to medical school already? The options are 1. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is 2. And option number 3 is 3 or more. We're at 75% having voted. Can we get it up? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. With 79% having voted, we're at everybody has applied once. Okay. Okay, that makes life easy. Let's share the results so we can see them. It's official. There's nobody here who applied more than one time. Okay, that's a good thing, actually. So we're going to stop that, and I guess we'll go for the second poll. And the second poll is, why do you think you were rejected? And you can choose any or all that apply to you. Okay, and the options are low stats, lack of clinical and or research experience, poor essays, you bombed your interviews, or other. Again, the options are low stats, lack of clinical or research experience, poor essays, bombed your interview, or other. Okay, so we have 70% having voted. Anybody else want to share what they think contributed to their rejection? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, with 70% having voted. The results are 59% felt that low stats played a role. 35% felt a lack of clinical or research experience. 24% felt that poor essays were involved, and 18% felt that bombed your interview, and 24% other. Maybe we can get into some of the other factors at a different point today, but okay, it's good to know. All right, so it seems like low stats played a role for a lot of you. All right, the good news is that these are all changeable circumstances, not your past stats, obviously, but you can create new stats. And you can change your essays, you can improve your interview skills, and obviously you can get the experience that you perhaps previously lacked. Okay, so we're going to close that for now. Now, in your worksheet, on the 3rd page, I think it is, you're going to find a table. And what I'd like you to do is, I think we asked you also to have some Post-it notes handy. If not Post-it notes, you can take notes just with pen or pencil. You can also use small pieces of paper. I like Post-it notes, though, because they can be moved around very easily. In your worksheet, you're going to find a table, and I'd like you to take a little Post-it note and write down what you think at this point caused your rejection. Each Post-it note will have one item on it, okay? If you suspect but aren't sure a specific element contributed, please write it down anyway and just put a question mark next to it. Again, one item per Post-it, put the Post-it in the second column as appropriate, and most of the Post-its will go in either the first or the second row. That's just going to be the way it is, okay? And I'd also suggest that you have some Post-it notes handy near you so you can add them in either column 1 or column 2 as we go through actually I would say row 1 or row 2, and yes, even row 3, as we go through the master class. And you may also get some action items. That would be for column 3. All right, let's move on. So the first thing you have to evaluate as you contemplate reapplication is, do you still want to be a physician? If you don't, then frankly, you don't need the rest of this master class. If yes, pull up a chair, hold on to your hat, because there's a lot of material to cover. First, I want to talk to you a minute about the inevitable disappointment of being rejected. It's true, rejection is disappointing and painful. You put a lot of effort into your medical school application, but it shouldn't be devastating. It isn't tragic, and it certainly isn't irrevocable. I was recently interviewed by Thrive magazine about running a successful service business, and the last question was really a curveball. And it was, if you could start a movement, what movement would you start? And I replied, and I'm quoting now what I said then, I would start an I Can Change movement. We have worked with and spoken to so many applicants who overcame all kinds of difficulties on their way to achieving incredible success. I'd like people to realize that whatever life has handed them, and everyone has challenges and difficulties, one can choose how to respond. Close quote. You can respond to your rejection with the kind of determination, commitment to growth, and self-awareness that will change the outcome of your next application. Whenever you submit that next application, it may not be this next round, but you really can change the outcome. And I invite you to join this I Can Change movement right now, even if it doesn't have a headquarters, board, dues, or anything like that. Let's get to work. There are 4 basic reasons for rejection. One is you weren't competitive at the schools you applied to. 2, you failed to present your qualifications effectively. Remember those poor essays? 3, you were a victim of the numbers and the intense competition that exists at medical schools, certainly in U.S. allopathic medical schools, but at the DO programs also, or a combination of the factors, right? It could be a combination of 2 or all 3 of them. And we're going to dig into each of these 4 reasons later in the master class. And then comes what you should do in response. Well, on a very high level, and again, we're going to dig deeper into this. If you are concerned that you weren't competitive, you're going to want to change your target programs to those where you will be competitive, or you want to improve your qualifications. And we're going to get into the specifics of what you can do about that. And of course, you can improve your presentation of your qualifications via your essays, your most meaningful experiences, your personal statement, the secondaries, et cetera, and of course, your interview. And then there's a combination of the above. So let's go back to the first possible reason for rejection, okay? And that is that you weren't competitive at the schools you applied to. Academics are usually the first place to look. And indeed, I think it was 59% of you said that low stats, which reflect academic preparation, were a contributing factor. So let's, again, evaluate what was low, what needs to be improved, okay? Schools you were applying to the schools you were applying to had average GPAs for matriculants that were 0.2 or more higher than yours, your low GPA might have contributed to your rejection. Now there's fudge room in there. It depends on your background, obstacles overcome, et cetera. But when you get into that range, that can definitely contribute to rejection. A low MCAT score. If you're more than 3 points below the school's average for the total score, you might be dealing with a low MCAT. Now, I personally recommend, more than using the total score, you look at the components in the MCAT, and you use the MSAR to assess the competitiveness of your GMAT. If you were below the 25th percentile score for admitted students, then, and that can definitely hurt. And again, individual section scores also make a difference. If both your scores and MCAT are low for the schools that you were applying to, there's trouble there. And you probably want at least one at or above the average, unless you're from a group that's underrepresented in medicine and you have other ways of showing your academic ability. But you must provide evidence that you can do the work in medical school. They really don't want to admit people who can't and who are going to flunk out or not pass a USMLE. So how do you respond if you evaluate your academic stats and find that they were below average or that they may have contributed to your rejection? Well, one thing you can do is apply to programs where you are competitive based on your current stats. That could be either less competitive MD programs or DO programs. You can also consider overseas programs, or you can consider some other programs in healthcare that might be easier to get into. You can also improve your qualifications so that you will be competitive at the programs you want to go to. One way to do that is via a post-bac program, either formal or informal. If you do well in the post-bac program, you show that you can handle the work of medical school. If you go to a formal post-bac program, especially one aimed at academic enhancement, it may provide you with MCAT support. It may improve your study skills. And some of these programs have linkages to different medical schools so that you don't have to apply again. And basically, assuming you perform well in the post-bac, you are assured acceptance at medical school. The other option is to prepare for and retake the MCAT. It's hard to overstate the importance of the MCAT historically in medical school admissions. I know that there are a couple of schools that have waived it for this year, but I don't know how far that's going to go. All right. And I think that if you determine that your MCAT was low for the schools you want to go to or for achievement of your goals, then you need to prepare for it again and take it again. I know it's easy for me to say and harder for you to do. And when you do take it again, allow time for it. View it as another class or another job, which means you should probably either work less, or if you can't afford to, or take one less class or cut down on your hours or whatever to allow yourself the time necessary to study and prepare. And when you're preparing, there's a certain tendency to focus on what we enjoy, which is usually what we're better at, but that won't help you raise your score. You have to focus on what's difficult. And what about the other elements that medical schools look for and really require? Well, the chief one among those, and this is getting back to the lack of clinical or research experience, is clinical exposure. If you don't have it, you simply must get it. Now, I realize it's harder because of COVID. I know the time we're living in, but it's still possible to get. You can get a job as an EMT. You can get a job as a scribe. You can attempt to be an ER volunteer or a clinic volunteer or a hospice volunteer. You can also do contact tracing, which doesn't expose you or to COVID. You can work on a telephone helpline, like a suicide prevention helpline. The point is that you want to be in a position where you are interacting with sick people and or their families and also other members of the healthcare team. If all you have is shadowing, then I would also encourage you to seek a role where you are active, where you have some responsibility, and again, are interacting with sick people and their families and other clinicians. Now, research is a little bit different. It is not required by medical school, except for research-oriented programs. They will want to see that you have it because they want to see identification with their mission. And even less research-oriented programs will value it because it's a certain mental discipline that's part of it. There's also something else that medical schools want to see. They want to see community service. Community service allows you to show that you care, and medicine is about service and caring. It also enables you to reveal the leadership and teamwork skills that are vital in medicine, and it allows you to show yourself as a person of impact and consequence. So if you lack in these areas, again, this is something that can be changed, and you can get this kind of experience. And I'd encourage you to do so. Now let's move on to poor presentation. All right. And I would encourage you to evaluate your primary application, your past primary application, and your secondary application. The primary, is really all about your fitness to be a physician. So, for example, I got a call a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago now, I think actually, from a mom who said her son checks all the boxes. He has a high GPA, a high MCAT, master's, clinical exposure, community service, but they aren't confident of his acceptance because she, and she could have been right or wrong, didn't feel that he did a good job of presenting himself. Now, realize that medical schools want multidimensional human beings committed to service and caring for others. Do your personal statements and MMEs show your motivation for medicine? Do they provide insight into you as a human being? Do the essays and activity descriptions complement each other and the rest of the primary application? Are your essays and MMEs well written, showing you as a professional with attention to detail who knows how to communicate? If you answered no to any of these questions, you have work to do. I should say you have work that you can do to improve your application. But it also means that poor presentation probably played a role in your rejection. Now, the secondary is a little bit different than the primary, in that the secondary is much more about showing fit with a specific school. So if your secondary essays were generic and not specific to the schools that you were applying to, they probably missed the mark. If your secondaries duplicated the primary application, again, they're not adding any value. If they were rushed and sloppy, much less showing fit with the school, if they were rushed and sloppy, then probably weren't all that professional. If you answered yes to any of the above, if you identify with any of the above, then again, that's something that you can change the next time around. You can improve the next time around and thereby improve your chances of acceptance. Does your writing throughout your primary and secondary applications show that you can communicate? Because communications is critical in medicine, both listening and conveying thoughts and information clearly. Your essays represent your communication skills, at least until the interview. Now, the reality is when you read your writing, it's very hard to be objective about your own writing. Professional writers have editors for a reason. And writing requires rewriting. And when you rewrite and you proof and you correct and you revise, and probably in a different order, it's more like revise, correct, proof, you reveal attention to detail and thoroughness, which is something else that admissions directors really value, admissions offices value. And here's a quote from a podcast that I had with Jennifer Welch, Associate Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at SUNY Upstate. At the time, they had a fairly simple secondary. And she said at the time, the secondary gives us information about applicants and also about how they do things, professionalism, attention to detail. If you make careless errors, such as errors in capitalization, etc., it's a red flag. Don't wave red flags in front of the admissions committee. So what is an effective presentation? For the written portions of the primary application, keep in mind this goal. You want to portray yourself as a multidimensional human being committed to service and caring for others. Each element of the application should contribute to that portrait, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. For the personal statement and the MMEs, think of the acronym PAD, okay? PAD stands for, the P stands for provide a window into the real you. The A is for add value to the rest of your application. And D, demonstrate your writing and communications ability. We constantly encourage our clients to use specifics and anecdotes to prove the claims they make, to help them stand out from the competition in the applicant pool, and to add interest to their essays. And if you combine good use of anecdotes and examples with analysis, then that relates why the incident is important and revealing why it's included, why it's important that the medical school admissions committee know it. Then you have the basis of really solid applications. For the primary, the question that you should be addressing is, why do you want to be a physician? And what qualities will make you a wonderful physician? For the secondaries, it's how the examples you provide answer the questions and show fit with a particular program's strengths and mission. And just as I advise you I think I forgot to advise you, but I should have said when we were talking about the MCAT, if you studied on your own with the MCAT, then maybe you want to take a course now. If you took a course before, maybe you want to consider a tutor now if you can afford it. Whatever you want to do, you don't want to do exactly what you did the last time around because you have no reason to expect that you'll have better results unless there was something, external. You got sick on the day of the exam or there was a jackhammer going or something like that, right? So if you could only study 3 hours a week, then you have to make sure that you can study 10 hours a week. Okay. Something has to be improved and changed about your study method if you want to raise your MCAT score. Similarly, just as I advise you right now to up your game with MCAT prep, consider upping your game by working with an accepted consultant who can provide the expertise, experience, and objectivity you lack and can certainly benefit from. Now, what if you bombed your interview? If you received 3 or more interview invitations and didn't get an acceptance anywhere, I frankly wonder about your interview skills. And again, the focus is on fit during the interviews. Interviewers want to see you as a member of their community and someone they would like to have as a colleague. And if you didn't show fit in the interview by being able to express why you want to attend that school, you could have blown your interview. If you got rattled and were very, very nervous, unusually nervous, and schools expect you to be a little nervous, you could have blown your interview. If they can't see you as someone they would want to have treating their family member, you blew your interview. So when you go into an interview, have a credible, coherent reason why any interviewing school is the right one for you. And frankly, having a mock interview, practice interviewing will calm your nerves and help you ace your interviews because with a mock interview, you also get feedback on how you're doing from somebody who's interviewed for medical schools and can give you concrete tips as to how to improve your interview technique. Now, the last possible contributing factor to rejection is just that you are a victim of the numbers and the intense competition. And the truth is that it is possible to be qualified and to present yourself well, and yes, still get rejected. And competition is extraordinarily intense at medical schools, and this year saw a dramatic increase in application volume. So for those of you who don't yet know if you got rejected, you may still get an acceptance, and I hope you do. But if you do get rejected, you have lots and lots of company. Now, if you honestly believe that you were competitive at last year's schools or this year's schools and also presented your qualifications well, I still have some suggestions for you. Don't do exactly what you did last time you applied. That's number one. It didn't work. I actually was just reading a book on medical school admissions by a medical school admissions dean, and I'm forgetting, I think it's called Med School Prep. And she said, if you're reapplying, don't submit the same thing. It didn't work. You will fail to show growth and maturation. Schools will be impressed negatively, this is me talking now, by the lack of effort you are investing this time around. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to med school admissions personnel, and they say they're completely turned off by people who just submit the same thing the second time around, even if they improve their MCAT score. If it's the same essays, same recs, same secondaries, nothing new. They're not at all impressed. Do consider applying to more schools, especially in-state programs that you would consider attending, and try and apply earlier in the cycle. It's very hard to be objective about something that you have poured your heart and soul into, which is why I recommend a rejection review. But avoid the conclusion that you did everything right and that competition, a reality you have no control over, was the sole cause of your rejection. Focus on the elements you can change and you can improve. For most of our clients that come to us the second time they apply, we have found that a combination of lack of competitiveness and poor presentation or flawed presentation of their qualifications contributed significantly to the rejection. And the good news is that those are all things you can influence, if not control. The good news is that you can change. It takes time and efforts. It's not easy, but it is possible. And at this point, I'd like to ask you to share in the chat window, please. What's the most valuable piece of advice, insight, or information for you in what was presented so far today? And we're going to go to the Q&A in just a few minutes. I'm actually going to be joined by one of our beloved consultants, most loved consultants. But if you could answer in the chat window so far, what was the most valuable piece of advice, insight, or information in what was presented so far today? Anybody? Rejection review. I believe I need it. Great, Nelson. We'd be delighted to help you with it. You got the coupon code, right? Good. To not repeat the same process in regards to MCAT prep for me personally. Okay, good. Mock interview. Make sure your second round application does not look exactly the same. Good. How important attention to detail is and how much of an influence participation on chances. Good. Don't do what you did last time. Great. Great. All right. Make sure secondaries are not general. Good. Thank you, Angela. Clinical and research is needed. Clinical is needed. Research depends on the schools you're applying to. Okay. Okay. Thank you for your feedback. I've spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of med school applicants like you, striving to get into medical school and overwhelmed by the work involved and perhaps rejected the first or second or even third time around before they came to accepted. We here at Accepted understand how difficult and stressful this process can be, and we're here so that you can apply confidently and successfully to the best programs for you. You're at a crossroads now. You took the do-it-yourself approach last time, and frankly, it didn't work. Take a different route this time, a professional option for your professional future, your dream career. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided, after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected, to work with us the second or third time around. They would have been better off working with us when they first got in touch with us, and so would you. You'll benefit from the know-how supplied by experts sharing their expertise and experience with you as an individual, one-on-one. Given the complexity of the application process and the stakes, and the fact that you really want this to be your last time applying to medical school, you need a guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. With Accepted, you can access professional expert advice, experience, and objectivity. You can save time. You can apply with confidence, and you can apply successfully. We have the admissions experts, the guides, who can mentor you through the process so that you achieve your goal of applying confidently and successfully. Former admissions directors, staff members, and post-bac program directors, and pre-health advising professionals who have been on the other side evaluating applicants and who can be your guide through the application process. Here's what you should do when you leave today. Visit accepted.com/change-med-reject. Choose a service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need to apply the high-level advice from today's masterclass to your specific situation. Go from confusion to clarity and from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may say, isn't Accepted expensive? Well, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious, even though it can be significantly higher. So let's take a look at the risks and costs of not applying with Accepted. Cost of reapplication can easily be several $1,000s a year. A year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO degree because you're going to postpone the start of medical school. In a non-COVID year, you may have the travel costs to schools and to interviews. And there is the possibility that you could have gotten into a better program with greater lifetime opportunities or even earnings or in some way more satisfying to you. But enough from me. What do Accepted's clients say? Here's a tiny sample of the feedback that we received from clients who were accepted by December in their application cycle. Actually, I don't think they were all accepted by December, but they were certainly all accepted. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will read part of it. Within 2 weeks after my first interview, which happened to be at my top choice for attendance and an MD school, no less, I got a phone call from the Dean of Admissions that I had been accepted. They even told me that I was a very competitive applicant and one of the first people accepted into their class. I was over the moon by this news, and Barry was one of the first people I reached out to regarding this. I felt like we had reached this accomplishment together as a cohesive team working toward a common goal. Here I am, an applicant who was initially told by others to give up, now labeled as one of the most competitive applicants they have had this year. I tell everyone to reach out to Accepted whenever they're, let's see, I lost my place here, whenever they're applying, whenever they're ready to start the process. Accepted is far more reasonably priced than others, and the money is well worth it. You will not be disappointed in your investment. Here's a different client. Hey, Sydney, I just found out I was accepted into the University of Kentucky's medical school program. They said my interview really impressed them. Thank you so much for all your help, advice, and preparation, because without you, I wouldn't have been able to be where I am today. Or another client, I got into UVM this morning, so thrilled about the news. Thank you so much for your support throughout this process. I'm still waiting to hear back from other schools, but this is such a relief. This reapplicant later was accepted also to Tulane and LSU. And finally, working with Alicia has been an indescribably wonderful experience and one of the best investments in my life. Thank you so much for making this possible through Accepted. Now, Joe was accepted in late December as a reapplicant. He followed Alicia's advice to both beef up his qualification and improve his presentation. He worked hard, but he knew before New Year's that he was going to medical school, and he was thrilled. We'd love to help you as we help these clients, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw, and thousands of other clients over the last 25 years. Imagine yourself for a second being in their shoes, just accepted to medical school. You may not have invested in yourself like this before, but isn't your future worth the investment? And remember, you can start with the rejection review, which can easily change and improve your next application to medical school. So once again, this is what I recommend you do as a follow-up to today's masterclass. Visit accepted.com/change-med-reject. Choose a service that's right for you, get the guidance you need, and apply confidently and effectively. And here's the bonus. Again, $75 off any rejection review purchased by February 15th. That is, I think I get the wrong date. Purchased by February 13th. Yeah, I have the wrong date written down here. Sorry about that. But it's by February 13th. And the coupon code is 2 times a charm. Now for your questions, and I believe we have a special guest here, that Dr. Barry Rothman. I'm joined by Dr. Rothman, who is the former director of 3 post-bac programs at San Francisco State. He's been an accepted admissions consultant for about 5 years, and his clients have had enormous success applying to post-bac, DO, and MD questions. So at this point, I am going to turn my video on so you can see me. And Barry, you want to turn your video on too?
It says that you have to.
I have to do that. That's
yes.
right. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, here we go. You should be able to do it now. You can see you too.
No, it's still saying.
Still saying no. All right, try again. Working? No?
No, it just said the host has stopped it.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to make you. Oh, well. I think you're just going to have my smiling face today. Sorry about that.
That's fine. I'm happy to answer questions without being visible on the video.
I thought I had you as visible, but okay. We'll go this way. You're going to have to deal with me. All right. Let's see. What questions do we have here? So far, here we have. Tyler has a question. If applying to a research-oriented school, is it necessary to have medical-related research specifically, or can be in another biological field unrelated to medicine? For example, research on animal dynamics. Barry?
Okay. Yes, I think schools like to see that you have research-oriented schools like to see that you've had research experience. It doesn't have to be medically oriented research. Of course, they would like that more, but showing that you know how to do research in any area is a plus for you. So by all means, apply to some research-oriented schools, even though your research is in animal dynamics. That's just fine. The way you can document your research is also important. For example, if you've had a poster presentation, you want to make sure that you make the schools available to that, aware of that. And also, if you've had any publications, by all means, make sure that they know that you've had those.
Okay. Here's another question from an anonymous attendee. I am taking an MCAT for the fourth time. How negatively does that look for my application?
A lot depends on how much your MCAT has changed and what you've done to change it. For some people, their MCAT score is the highest they can get it. Uh, it just has to do with your own particular way of dealing with the MCAT. Um, if it's not going up after 2 or 3 or 4 times, then I think you might want to just live with your MCAT score. If you haven't studied for it properly, Linda has pointed this out a number of times in her presentation, you might think about ways to change the way you're studying, having more time, doing more interactive studying, looking at new sources, for example, videos by Khan Academy, etc. Uh, and as Linda has pointed out many times, if you do the same thing over and over again, you're likely to get the same result. So if you're going to take the MCAT for a fourth time, by all means, try to do it differently, try to do it in a better way. And just to get to the essence of your question, yeah, it doesn't look as good to take the MCAT 4 times and finally improve. Schools like to see people do well the first time, and sometimes they think that by taking the MCAT over and over and over again, you get to learn it better and get to understand it. And so in a sense, your score could be seen as a little bit inflated. So it's always better to do your best the first time when you take the MCAT. However, if you take it 4 times and you've improved, okay, give it a shot. Maybe the schools will understand.
I believe this is from the same questioner. That person added, I previously increased my score from a 498 to a 501 to a 509.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a nice improvement. So first of all, congratulations on the improvement. Second of all, I think that I certainly agree with you, Barry, that it'd be great if you got the best score the first time out. I think you also have to be aware that some schools will average scores. Some schools will take the most recent score. Some schools will take the highest score. So it depends a little bit also on the schools that you're applying to. What do you think about that?
Um, well, I was impressed by the increase in
Yeah.
MCAT score. Uh, that shows that you worked hard. You didn't just do the same thing over and over again. And so good for you. I think schools will notice that. What you might want to do in your secondaries is explain that somewhere. Sometimes in secondaries, there's a question where you can give any extra information at all. There's no specific prompt. And so you might tell them what happened with your MCAT study. Perhaps you had very few resources the first time, and then as you improved your studying skills and had more resources, you did better and better. But I would try to explain it to the schools. Good for you.
Right. Okay. Angela asks, how many schools do you recommend applying to?
Uh, well, it's very difficult to get into a medical school. If you think about it, schools get 5,000 applications, 10,000 applications. So your chances of getting in are low even when you're qualified. So what I suggest to my clients is to apply to about 40 schools. Now, I know that is expensive, and some of my clients apply to 40 schools and some apply to fewer. I would say, by all means, apply to at least 20, but I like 40 because, again, the chances go up as you apply to more schools. If you pick the schools reasonably and rationally, your chances of getting in go up. Many people who apply to 40 schools wind up with 1 or 2 or 3 interviews. So given those odds, I think playing the numbers game is really a really good idea.
Right. There are differences of opinion on the numbers. 40, frankly, sounds a little high to me, but certainly if you can submit, maintain the quality of your applications and apply to 40 schools, I would certainly agree that you're increasing your odds because the numbers are low. Okay, so Angela asks, can you change from a rejected to accepted applicant in just 5 months? The new cycle is approaching. that's directly related to what I presented. So I'm going to respond, and Barry, you can add. I
Okay.
think that really depends on how much needs changing and what needs changing. If you have a GPA that's seriously below the schools that you want to attend's average GPA for matriculants, you might want to consider a post-bac program, and that is not going to get done in 5 months. If you have the time to prepare hard for the MCAT, and that's the biggest weakness, at least in terms of the stats, then yes, you could probably do that in 5 months. And in terms of improving the presentation, yes, that's definitely something you can do in 5 months. So it depends very much on what needs to be done. If you lack clinical, community, and research experience, you can get some of that in 5 months, but probably not all of it. Barry, what do you think about
Yes.
that?
The thing that's maybe the easiest is to change the way you present yourself.
Yeah.
And of course, that will only work if all the other things are in line and you just didn't present yourself well. That you can change easily in 5 months, and hopefully with some help from us. Some of the other things that Linda mentioned, like GPA and MCAT scores, those are going to be hard to change in 5 months. So I often tell my clients the fastest way to medical school is slowly. And most of you are in your 20s, and if you spend an extra year getting your application in a better place, it's time well spent. And rushing into a second application immediately after getting rejected the first time may not be the wisest way to proceed.
That's right. Also, I was really pleased. I don't know if you were on, Barry, at the very beginning. I did a poll and I asked how many of the attendees have applied once, twice, or 3 or more times. Everybody who replied is reapplying for the first time. In other words, they only applied once. Oh, you saw that. Okay, so you were on then.
Yes.
And I think that's a big advantage for you folks. I mean, I think most medical students are actually reapplicants. But it does get harder when you've reapplied 3 or more times. So you folks are in relatively good shape in that regard. Okay, so we have another anonymous attendee question. I think it's a different attendee though. I have some question. 1, I made a typo in my secondary and still received an interview as well as without my MCAT score. But after getting my MCAT score, I am unsure if they will accept the score. Should I address this during my interview? I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm pleased that you got an interview invitation despite a typo on the secondary. It is possible. I didn't want to imply in my presentation that one typo is going to doom you. Okay. That wasn't the point. I was talking about sloppy essays and lack of attention to detail. Obviously, you're going to probably wonder, well, what is the crossing point? Is it 2 typos? Is it 3 typos? Is it 5 typos? I don't know that I can give you a formula. Just minimize the typos, okay? And I don't understand the part of the question. Again, my MCAT score, I'm unsure if they will accept this score. Should I address this during my interview? I'm not sure. Do you understand the question, Barry?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, all right, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to apply the question to both pieces of information. So the typo is no big deal. If you have one typo, I would not bring it up.
Yeah.
Secondly, you might want to wait and see if they ask you about your MCAT. And then if there's time at the end of the interview and they ask you if you have any questions or comments, you might bring it up if you feel that it's seriously below their range. They know what your MCAT score is, although some interviews are blind, and so they may not actually know your MCAT score. So yeah, you could bring it up at the end, but I would give them time to ask you first rather than blurting it out at the beginning of your interview. I'd save it for the end, if at all. Okay.
And there's 2 more questions on this particular message. Should I send update letters, letters of interest, letters of intent after my interview? You should certainly send a thank you letter. In terms of the update to the interviewers, if you have their contact information, If in terms of update letters, letters of interest, etc., it depends on the school you're applying to. Do they consider them? Do they accept them? That's number one. And number two is, do you have something to update them about? And Barry, what would you want to say about that one?
I agree wholeheartedly. A letter of intent, I think, is rather weak. It just reiterates the fact that, gee, yeah, I'm interested in applying to your school. I think an update letter is much more powerful. Something that's changed, some new grades, a new position, a position that's changed. Anything like that could be a reason to send an update. And so I think med schools like that much more than just a letter of intent. Also, don't send one letter of update after another after another. Be cautious. The schools don't like that. So wait until something really big has happened so that you can send an update. Don't just send a trivial response. And don't do it often, maybe once or twice during the entire cycle.
All right. And then the third question on this post is, when reapplying, I'd like you to say, if reapplying to medical schools next year, should I change all extracurricular activities and meaningful activity essays? Can I add one or two activities? I'm unsure how much I need to change. It's a little difficult to say without actually seeing your application, which is why we recommend the rejection review. But I don't know, Barry, how would you like to reply to this?
Well, definitely seeing some new activities is a great idea.
Yeah.
That will strengthen your application. You also might think about the way you write up the narratives for your previous experiences. Do the narratives say what the setting is? Do the narratives say what your responsibilities are? Do the narratives say what you learned?
Right.
Go ahead, Linda.
No, you cut out there for a second, but then you came back. So it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that, I think it was actually at a very similar webinar that we did last year. We were talking with, answering questions, responding to medical school applicants. And they were saying, well, what can we change in the activities? The activity hasn't changed. It happened already. And we said, well, how did you describe it? Did you talk about your achievements? Did you focus on what you actually accomplished in the activity? Or did you just talk about your responsibilities? And that is a way in which you can improve the presentation of the activities, even though the activities have not changed. All right. Okay. And I think we've gone through those. Let's move on. Jennifer asks, what's a good rule of thumb for categorizing schools as research focused versus not research focused?
I would say look at their mission statement, and I don't think there's a listing of research focused versus non-research focused, or a prioritized list. I think you have to read their descriptions in the MSAR and look at their mission statements, and to get a sense of which ones are research focused.
I'd also see if there was a research requirement in the program. If there's a research requirement, then that is a research focused school. Another way to look at it. Okay. Tyler asks, is there a ballpark number of clinical hours we should aim for?
I like to see at least 100 hours for my applicants. And I also like to see maybe more than one clinical experience. So having them all in one place, if you have 300 hours in one location, that's great. It's nice to see people staying in a place for 6 months at least, perhaps as long as a year. And I'd like to see something like 100 hours or more.
Okay. I also think it's the hours. Certainly the medical schools want to see some commitment, and they want to see clinical exposure. But it's the quality of the experiences that's going to matter more than the number of hours. I think there's sometimes an obsession with the numbers because they're very concrete and measurable. There's a certain comfort in that. Yes. But it's the quality that I really try and focus more on that. Okay. All right. Another anonymous attendee is asking, would you elaborate on whether the school's delayed decisions this time have not heard from quite a few schools? The answer is yes, but Barry, do you want to go into that more?
I think the whole application process has been more difficult for everybody. And the schools, as Linda mentioned, the number of applicants is up about 20%. And COVID has certainly slowed down the wheels of the application committee, the admissions committee. So yes, I think things are just happening slower now. I have clients who are just starting to get interviews in the last month or so. So I'd say don't freak out quite yet. There's still time to get interviews just because the whole process has been slowed down.
Carly, can you post the link to the article on, it's a blog post that we have on when will, I haven't heard from medical school, when will medical schools get back to us? Because that article says that some schools are sending out interview invitations now still into March. Some have finished already, but some are still sending them out. And it also indicates, at least this, it's not all medical schools, but it does give you some idea. And it also indicates which schools are open to letters of update letters, as Barry was talking about them. And I think it is more useful to think about them as update letters than letters of intent. You've basically already signaled your intent by applying to the school. All right. Let's see. We have some more questions here. Okay, we have an anonymous attendee who's asking, will I need to apply to a master's program if my MCAT is 498 and I have a 3.9 GPA? What do you say, Barry?
3.9 GPA and the MCAT was
498.
Well, there's a sort of discrepancy between your MCAT performance and your GPA. Of course, I don't know what your major was, so that might be part of the reason. I would first of all work on the MCAT to see what are the reasons that you're getting a 498, which is just a tad below average, but for both MD and DO schools, that's not particularly competitive. So I think I would first think about the MCAT and then think about whether you need to go to a master's program. If you were a biomedical sciences major and you have a 3.9 GPA, you really don't need to improve your academic performance. You need other things, perhaps clinical experience, but most importantly, you need to understand why the MCAT score is not reflective of your GPA. I would focus on that before deciding to go to a master's program.
Right. Okay. Nelson asks, do you recommend changing your personal statement after a year of graduate school?
Yeah. I would definitely add what did you learn from graduate school? And hopefully you went to graduate school in an area that gave you some extra credentials and extra goodies for applying to medical school. Most definitely add that to your personal statement.
Okay. Here's a very good question from an anonymous attendee. I worked really hard on all my essays, and I think my MCAT score was the main reason for my rejection, since everything else aligned with all the schools I applied to. How do I try to change my essays that I previously worked so hard on to make it not look the same or repeat, but also create new stories that demonstrate the same things I tried to emphasize in my original essays?
Yeah. Well, one thing is to get help from somebody on the outside who has a different set of lenses, who might help you reorganize your essays and tweak them. I appreciate that you worked really hard on your essays, and people are very attached to their writing. I know I'm very attached to my writing. And so to change it is painful. But I think getting another set of eyes on your writing so that you could get some suggestions of different ways to present it, maybe even better ways. I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking also. It's, you can, the other thing is when you reapply, you can show how your this year's experiences have increased your interest in medicine, have deepened your commitment to medicine. Um, because again, you don't want to appear as a stagnant individual or as a lazy individual. So, but I think the best advice is to get somebody else to look at them and discuss with you how you can improve them and changing them. Anonymous attendee asked, does scribing count as clinical experience, or do we need to be doing hands-on work as an EMT or a CNA? Scribing does count. It's great experience. And Kay asks, clinical needs to be done over all 4 years or till date of application, or they need certain number of hours or hours or whatever.
People do get their clinical experience in many different ways. Some have it all through their undergraduate career. Some don't even know they want to go to medical school until later in their undergraduate career and then start getting clinical hours. Some people haven't been able to get enough clinical hours because of the COVID pandemic. Whatever it is, get going on it and continue to get clinical experience, and keep the medical schools appraised of your clinical experience as you go along. Many people who are applying now, as things open up and vaccines become available and there's more and more room for clinical experience, should make sure that the medical schools understand that they're seeking clinical experience, and when they get clinical experience, a new experience, to let them know that you're definitely pursuing it.
Sounds good. Thank you. And anonymous attendee asks, when should we start to worry about not getting an interview invitation? Around mid-March? I'm going to take this one, and you can add, Barry, okay? Worrying about it doesn't do any good. What you should be doing now is pursuing parallel tracks. One is doing everything you can do to get accepted based on your application this cycle, and the other is preparing for a reapplication so that by mid-March, mid-April, May, or whenever you finally know that you are not going to start medical school this year, you are already on your way and set up, primed to apply early to this medical school cycle. Barry, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with Linda. Worrying is not really that helpful. I would say that it's a good chance to practice your stress reduction techniques. And you're heading into a career with lots of stress, so it's not too early to start learning how to handle the worrying and the stress. So by all means, put some energy into that. Also, one important date is at the end of April or beginning of May, when the med schools make you only choose one admission. So some people got multiple admissions to medical schools at the end of April, beginning of May. They can only hold one admission. And so a number of places open up. Now, if you haven't had an interview by then, unlikely you would get one at that late of a date. Right. But if you had an interview and you haven't been admitted, then seats open up. A lot of seats open up at the end of April and beginning of May. After that, if you haven't had interviews by then I think it's very unlikely. If you have had an interview, it's possible that you'll be successful around that time. But as Linda said, it's really good to do the parallel track, to do the best you can this cycle and start thinking about the next cycle.
Okay. I'd even say start preparing for the next cycle. But okay. Is it okay to include, this is from Nelson, is it okay to include experiences that have yet to be completed in the primary application?
You're allowed to put future dates, but I would not put an experience that has not happened. And the good part about that is then you can have an update. But to add an experience that has not started makes
I think he's asking about not yet completed.
Oh, not yet completed. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, by all means. Many of the experiences are in progress. So yes, yes. Uh, and, who knows when they'll be completed. Many experiences are completed soon before you start medical school.
Right. Okay. And a question from anonymous attendee: does interviewing patients, such as in focus groups for health-related research projects, is that considered clinical experience?
I would consider that clinical experience in the sense that you're having contact with patients. I value that a lot. Um, to see what patients go through and to talk to patients, that is a very, very valuable experience. Sure, it's great to see them in the clinical setting, but having contact with patients is extremely valuable, even if it's in a focus group.
Okay, last question because I'm running over. I have an internship this summer but I still have some more to say. I have an internship this summer that I know I have, and I know what I would be doing. Should I add to that? Should I add that to my activities? Or since it hasn't started, I should put it, I guess I should put it off or put it in secondaries or whatever, but he kind of didn't
Yes,
finish
I
the
think I
sentence.
answered
Yeah.
that one previously. Yes, don't put it in your activities because you don't know if it'll happen until you start. So don't put it in your activities, but after you've been there a while, send it as an update. It's a great reason to send an update, and it looks like progress. It looks more like progress than if you had had it in your application.
Also, if you start planning to start it in the summer, then you probably will be able to include it in your secondaries.
Correct.
Because once it's in progress, it's in progress. So you can definitely mention it then. I want to thank you very much, Barry, for joining me. I'm very sorry the video didn't work out. And I want to thank you, participants, for your time, your answers, your questions, your participation, and good luck with your application. I do have a final thought and a story and a question that I would really appreciate your help with. When our eldest son was a baby, my husband and I went to an event where we met a former teacher of ours. He took one look at the chubby, sleeping child in the stroller and said, "This is an experiment that must be repeated." Applying to medical school and getting rejected is the opposite. It is an experiment that you don't want to repeat, or what you really want is different results. You need to evaluate what went wrong and change your application strategy and execution in order to have those different results. And now the story about a client who had very different results. Terry, not her real name, accepted to work with her. She had previously applied to medical school and received one interview invitation, no acceptances. She had a below average MCAT and GPA from most allopathic medical schools. The second time around, she worked with Dr. Barry Rothman, who's been helping me out here with the Q&A. And he evaluated her application and helped her improve it. The results the second time around were she was invited to 5 interviews and accepted to 2 MD programs. Terry did as so many others have done over the last 26, 27 years now. She accessed the objectivity, expertise, and experience that an accepted consultant provides. She's in medical school and donned her white coat. She's going to be an MD. Imagine yourself just a few years behind her, starting medical school in summer 2022 and proudly attending your own white coat ceremony shortly thereafter. She followed the steps on the screen. She got accepted to medical school, and so can you. Get accepted. And now the question that I'm hoping you folks can help me with. You've attended the masterclass on reapplication. You listened to my pitch very patiently. You attended the Q&A, and there were lots of great questions from you. Thank you for that. And also this little close. You are clearly interested in what Barry and I have to say, which I appreciate tremendously. So my question is, what's causing you to hesitate to engage with an accepted consultant one-on-one who can really help you next time around? If you could share your answer to that question, I would tremendously appreciate it. Okay, cost. All right, I appreciate that. Cost, yes, I see it. Okay, finances. All right. Now, all right, let me point out to address the cost issue two things, a few things actually. One, applying to medical school can be much more expensive than our fees. And I know you're saying, well, in order to apply, I got to pay the application fees. I understand that. I don't have to pay you folks. That's true. But if you apply and you aren't accepted, then that money is just expense. It's down the drain. It doesn't do you any good. Yeah, I understand you spend so much on medical school. Our minimum fee is $330. That is about the cost of applying to 2 schools. And most of you are going to apply to many, many more than that. Now, it's true, we do have more extensive services and they are more expensive. But again, if you're going to spend thousands of dollars on the application process and not get in, wouldn't it make sense to spend a few hundred that could perhaps make the difference between getting in and not getting in? So that's number one. Number two, we do offer free consultations so you can try us out if you are considering the service. And number three, and actually, Carly, you can post the link to the free consultation form. And number three is we do offer various payment plans. Obviously, there's credit card. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. We also have PayPal credit, which is 6 months to pay, no interest, no payments. There's also Affirm, which allows, depending upon how much you actually purchase, either 1 year or 3 years of payments, but it does charge interest. So we don't get that interest. We have nothing to do with that. That's how they work it. So any discount on family? I don't understand the question. What does that mean? Have your siblings worked with us before? Is that the point? So the cost you already invested in medical school applications, then we would, if you have 2 people applying from your family, we would give you a discount. Yes. Tyler mentioned the cost. I feel I've already spent so much on medical school. Those are sunk costs that you can't get back. All you can do is make sure that the future applications that you're submitting really represent you well, are appropriately, that you're applying to the right schools where you do have a chance of acceptance, and that they present you well, and that they improve your chances of acceptance. Again, what you did last year, if you don't get accepted, I realize that many of you are waiting to hear still, and I genuinely hope that you get in. If you know, that money, if you have to reapply, is basically down the tubes. Don't let it happen again. Yes, Barry.
I just wanted to mention that everybody who's here today, and in fact other people, are all welcome to a free consultation with one of our consultants. That's free, and the consultations last 15 to 30 minutes. So you get free advice during that time. And then if you want to get more detailed feedback and some direction, you could buy an hour and you could get very valuable information without a huge amount of cost. So you don't have to start out by buying, you know, a multi-$1,000 package. You can start out with a free consultation and then maybe jump to a 1 hour continued consultation where you can get advice and some hand-holding and figure out what your next steps are.
Okay. Anybody else have further thoughts on what's holding you back? Some of you may already be clients or considering becoming clients. You're very welcome, Kay, that you want to share with me. I do find this feedback very, very valuable. So thank you.
Thanks, Carly.
And Carly just posted Barry's contact page if you want to talk directly to him. That's great. Thank you. All right. Barry, I want to thank you for your assistance.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And applicants, I want to thank you for your time, your attention, and good luck with your applications, both this past year's and any application you'll submit in the future. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.